Welcome to the Amazing Dinosaurs channel. Today we are checking out a collection of Saurischian dinosaurs versus Ornithischian dinosaurs. But what do these two dino classifications mean exactly? Well, Ornithischian dinosaurs here on the left have a pelvic structure similar to birds, and Saurischians here on the right have a pelvis shape similar to lizards. There's a lot of other differences, but that's the main big difference. So let's first start with a Saurischian dinosaur, and this is the Indominus Rex. These dinosaurs are ginormous. They stand at around 18 feet high and 50 feet long from their head to their tail, and they can weigh up to 6 tons as well. And out of all the carnivore figures that I have, this Indominus Rex figure is definitely one of the largest. Now let's go over to the Ornithischian side. This is a Stegosaurus dinosaur. These dinosaurs in real life could be between 20 and 30 feet long from tail to head, up to 13 feet tall from the ground all the way to the top up here, and they could weigh 11,000 pounds too, so that is one heavy dinosaur. And this figure's got a secret hidden attack button. When you press down on its plate right here, it swings its tail back and forth. Next up for the Saurischian dinosaurs is the Theropod dinosaur, made popular by Jurassic World Dominion. This dinosaur lived in the late Cretaceous period. They could be up to 33 feet from head to tail and around 16 feet tall, and that is way taller than human beings. Plus, they could weigh around 5 tons as well. And this Theropod figure is pretty cool because you can use the tail to move the torso around and chomp the jaw. Now for the Ornithischian side is an Ankylosaurus dinosaur. This species lived in the late Cretaceous period as well. They could grow up to 26 feet long from head to tail and could weigh almost 9 tons in total. This Ankylosaurus figure is from the Hammond collection, so it's a lot larger than many of my other ones, and it has many more points of articulation, so you can pose it in all sorts of different ways and even open its mouth. Now for the Saurischian side is a super popular dinosaur, of course. This is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. These dinosaurs could grow to be 40 feet long from head to tail and 12 feet tall, and they weighed around 6 tons as well. This is the Hammond collection Tyrannosaurus Rex, so it's a lot more detailed than many of my other figures, and it is very posable, just like the Ankylosaurus was. Back to the Ornithischian side, I've got a Sinoceratops figure. This dinosaur species could grow to 16 feet from head to tail, and they could weigh up to 2 tons. It has many similar features to a Triceratops, like the frill and then the spikes on the front. And with this figure, you can move the tail back and forth to get some sound effects and to move its head. For the Saurischian dinosaurs, I've got an Allosaurus figure. This dinosaur species lived during the Jurassic period. They could grow to be 28 feet long from tail to head, which is pretty long but not quite as long as a T-Rex, and they could weigh up to 2 tons as well. This is my battle damage Allosaurus. You can see right here the battle damage is already opened up. You can even lift up the ribs and touch the intestines, or like the stomach on the inside. And then there's a button on its back for some sound effects and chomping. Next up, I've got a brand new figure that is actually a mixture of a Saurischian and an Ornithischian dinosaur. It is a Giganotosaurus and a Nasutoceratops, and it's from the Fierce Changers. So right now the figure is in its Giganotosaurus form, and you can move the tail around, the legs, the arms, and the head. So now let's see it transform into its Nasutoceratops form. And here it is in its Ornithischian form. You can see the Giganotosaurus features are now underneath, tucked away, and its dark brown features of the Nasutoceratops are now being shown. And right over here is a normal Nasutoceratops figure from Jurassic World. These dinosaurs were estimated to have been around 15 feet in length from tail to head and weighing around 1.5 tons. And this dinosaur has 2 action buttons on its back, one for lifting the head up for a stabbing or roaring action, and the other button on its back to swing its tail back and forth. Next up, for the Saurischian side, I've got a Carnotaurus dinosaur figure. These dinosaurs in real life were probably around 30 feet in length from tail to head, around 10 feet tall, and they could weigh up to 2 tons as well. And this is a pretty sizable figure, slightly smaller than my T-Rex figures, and it has a tail that you can move back and forth to move its head and to chomp its jaw. My next Ornithischian dinosaur is the Hesperosaurus. These dinosaurs could reach 21 feet in length from tail to head, and they often weighed around 3.5 tons. It looks pretty similar to a Stegosaurus, and this figure is from the Epic Evolution collection, so it's got this little wheel dial thingy on its back to swing its tail back and forth. Now for the Saurischian side, I've got a Velociraptor blue figure. Velociraptors could grow to around 7 feet in total, and they weighed around 40 or 50 pounds, so pretty lightweight compared to a lot of other dinosaurs in here. And this figure's pretty cool because it moves in a pretty lifelike way. You can press down on its body, have it open and close its mouth. It is really cool. This next Ornithischian dinosaur is called a Parasaurolophus. These dinosaurs grew to around 33 feet in length, 15 feet tall when it's standing up, and around 3 or 4 tons. I think this figure is one of the earlier versions, but it still has this action button on its back, one for moving the tail back and forth, and the other button to move its head up and down, but there's no sound effects. The next Saurischian dinosaur is a Spinosaurus. This was the largest known carnivorous dinosaur, and it lived in the late Cretaceous period. These ginormous dinosaurs could grow to almost 60 feet in length, around 25 feet in height, and they could weigh between 13 and 22 tons. This Spinosaurus figure is one of my basic versions of the Spinosaurus, colored like the Legacy Collection larger Spinosaurus figure. But since it's the basic version, you can only move its arms, its legs, and its tail just a little bit. Next up, for the Ornithischian dinosaurs, I've got an Edmontosaurus dinosaur. This dinosaur species lived during the late Cretaceous period. It could be up to 50 feet in length from tail to head and weigh up to 9 tons. I really like the coloring on this figure with the tan and the dark blue along its back and its tail, and then the brighter coloring in the front. Now here is a Dilophosaurus for the Saurischian dinosaur side. This dinosaur species grew to around 20 feet in length and weighed around 700 pounds. This is the basic edition of the Dilophosaurus, so it's a lot larger of a figure than most, but it doesn't have as many features. You can move the arms, the legs, and the tail, and you can move the frills back and forth. Next up is the Cosmoceratops for the Ornithischian side. These dinosaurs grew to around 15 feet in length, and they weighed between 1 and 2 tons. And although this figure is small, it still has a special feature that when you move its tail, it moves its head up and down too. Here is a Concavinator dinosaur for the Saurischian side. This dinosaur lived during the early Cretaceous period, and it could grow up to 20 feet long and weigh up to 900 pounds. This Concavinator figure is from the Hammond collection, so it has much better coloring and detailing compared to other versions. Plus it has many additional points of articulation for really great posing too. This is the Ava ceratops figure from the Epic Evolution collection. This Ornithischian dinosaur could grow to around 13 feet in length and weigh up to 1 ton. And you can move the legs on this figure and the head up and down, but sadly there are no special features. This next dinosaur is a Herrerasaurus dinosaur for the Saurischian dinosaur side. This dinosaur lived during the late Triassic period, and adult dinosaurs could grow to around 20 feet in length and weigh up to 700 pounds. And I think this might actually be my newest Herrerasaurus figure, and it has an action button right here on its back for a chomping motion. Just a small handful of dinosaurs left in here. This Ornithischian dinosaur is the Minmi species. This dinosaur was probably around 10 feet in length and weighed around 600 pounds, so a pretty small dinosaur. I've got another Dilophosaurus figure here, this version a lot smaller, but it has some pretty cool coloring on it, and it has an attack feature that when you move its tail, it springs up its frills. Next, I've got a Styracosaurus dinosaur. This is an Ornithischian dinosaur, and they could grow to around 16 feet in length and weigh between 2 and 3 tons. This is a pretty small figure, but it has some really cool detailing. Check out all these spikes along its frill. And it has a special feature that when you move its tail, it lifts its head up for a stabbing action. And I've got two more Velociraptor figures in here. Both of these figures are kind of the average size for Velociraptor figures created by Mattel. This first one's got the gray with yellow detailing on its body, and this other one here is much more brighter with the red and then the green on top. Plus, this figure is actually spring-loaded in its legs, so if you press it down and release it, it'll fly up into the air, which is a pretty cool feature. And our final Ornithischian dinosaur is a Pachycephalosaurus. These dinosaurs lived in North America during the late Cretaceous period. They grew to around 15 feet in length, and they weighed between 800 and 1,000 pounds. And I believe this is the Legacy Collection Pachycephalosaurus, so it has some pretty cool coloring. I really like that shade of blue. And it has a special feature with its tail. It lowers its head with a spring and then springs it up for a headbutting action. And last of all is the Brachiosaurus for the Saurischian dinosaurs. Now this is a juvenile Brachiosaurus, but this species was one of the tallest and largest dinosaurs, reaching a height of around 42 feet. And not only that, but they could weigh up to 99,000 pounds, which is so much more heavier than any other dinosaur we've seen in this collection. So here is the entire collection standing up on the table. Now, which of these Saurischian dinosaurs was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. And what about the other side? Which of these Ornithischian dinosaurs was your favorite? Let me know by commenting below. Let's check out the first Theropod. This is the 93 real feel T-Rex figure that came out really recently. It's got the rubbery skin and the stomach compartment so you can actually feed this T-Rex smaller dinosaurs. Our first sauropod, I believe, is a Brachiosaurus figure. This figure comes in the dark green, it has some red detailing along the top and the lighter underbelly, and of course the super long neck with the smaller head in the front. Our next Theropod is the Camp Cretaceous Epic Roarin' T-Rex. It comes in the light brown coloring with the darker brown along the top and the tail that controls the head and the chomping. Our next sauropod, I believe, is another Brachiosaurus. This one has much more interesting detailing along its body. You can see all the different muscles and the bones as well. And it comes in this darker green coloring. There's also some darker detailing throughout. And at the top of its head, it's got some dark orange eyes. Our next Theropod is this special Spinosaurus figure. This figure is from Jurassic World, but it actually has custom coloring over its entire body, so you won't see this coloring anywhere else. Plus, it's got the button on its head for the chomping action too. For the next sauropod is the Nigersaurus figure from Jurassic World. This one is part of the new Dino Tracker series. It has two tones of green, the bright green in the front and the darker green in the back, and a slide lever action on its back for the sound effects and movement. This next Theropod is another T-Rex. This one's pretty special because it comes in a dark green coloring with the black accenting on top, which is pretty unusual for the Jurassic World figures. And its entire body is posable, and of course you can chomp the jaw with the button at the top of its head. Next up is a strange looking sauropod. I'm actually not sure what type of sauropod this is, so let me know in the comments if you recognize this species. But it has some amazing coloring with the green, purple, blue, red, and these interesting spikes along its neck. Now let's check out this one that I just bought, and let's see what it is. All right, this is a Theropod, and it is the battle damage Spinosaurus. This one was actually really hard to find, so let's open it up and check it out. I am super excited to finally have this to add to my collection. This is the first blue and yellow Spinosaurus figure that I have. In terms of its shape and its size, it's pretty similar to the Legacy Collection and the Camp Cretaceous version. But for the best part, let's check out the battle damage right here on the side. That is so cool. That is ginormous. And then you can also even open up its ribs to reveal what's underneath right here. And there's a hidden button right here on its spine that make its insides spin. Now that is pretty awesome. Let's do another Theropod. This is a custom colored T-Rex figure. This one's pretty special because it looks like a fire T-Rex, and I think it definitely looks scarier than most of the other T-Rex figures. This next sauropod figure is an Ankylosaurus, and this one was for Jurassic World Dominion. It's got a bunch of interesting little spikes all over its body, and you can use the tail to move the head around and open and close its mouth. This theropod is called the Suchomimus figure. This version is in the dark blue with the yellow accenting and one action button on its back to chomp the jaw. This other theropod figure is the Therizinosaurus figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's a pretty big figure, and it has feathered texturing all over its body, and the best part are these huge claws on its hands. This next figure here might be a Diplodocus figure, I'm actually not sure, but it has some cool coloring, the brown stripes on the back, the gray on the sides, tan underbelly, and it has some pretty decent detailing too. They even colored in the eyes. This theropod figure is the Jurassic World Carcharodontosaurus. This version of this dinosaur has the tan body with the brown and orange accenting along the top, and all these little spikes running along its back, and a single action button for chomping. Now here's a pretty special one. This is the Lego edition Brachiosaurus figure. I think these figures are pretty rare and hard to find nowadays, so I'm pretty happy to have one in my collection. This theropod is the Seats Microrarum figure from Jurassic World. It's colored in the orange, the tan, and the dark blue. It's got a ton of rows of spikes running along its head and its back. And it has the action that when you move its tail, it also moves its head and controls its jaw. This sauropod is called the Amargosaurus. It has the dark brown coloring with the darker accenting and a little bit of red along its spines. And check out, there's actually 2 rows of spines along its neck that form into one spine running down its body. And this figure has 2 action buttons. The first button moves its head up and down, and the second action swings its tail back and forth. This theropod is the Allosaurus figure. This version is in the dark green, and it has the white and red accenting. It's got a short row of spines right on the top of its neck, and this figure has the slide lever action for a bunch of sound effects and roar poses. This next sauropod kind of looks like a Brachiosaurus figure to me, and I think this is the only one that I have that is red colored. And sadly, you can't move any of its limbs or its tail or anything like that, but I do appreciate the detail and texturing along its body. This theropod is another Allosaurus figure, but this one is in the gray with the yellow accenting. It also has posable arms and legs and a single action button on its back for chomping. Here's the second Suchomimus figure of this sauropod versus theropod collection. This second version has the bright yellow body with the brown accenting along the top, and this Suchomimus features 2 action buttons, one for chomping and the other for swinging its tail. Man, do I have a lot of Brachiosaurus figures. This one is also a Brachiosaurus. It's got some interesting orange spotting all over its body, and it's quite a bit smaller than many of the other figures so far. This next theropod is another T-Rex figure. This one is from the first Jurassic World movie, and it's actually a pretty special one. It's got some interesting coloring, patterning along its side, and it actually has hidden spikes that pop out when you press a button. Over here, I've got an Irritator figure from Jurassic World. This is an older version that features the brown sides with the 2 tones of blue along its spine. And this feature comes with sound effects and a tail that controls the head. I've also got some Baryonyx figures in here, like this dark green one with the brown coloring along the top, and the single action button on its back for chomping. This next figure is a basic Velociraptor figure from Jurassic World. This one is actually Velociraptor Blue. And since it's a basic figure, you can only move the arms and the legs and the tail, but there's no action button. Up next is my first baby Brachiosaurus figure. This one is in the gray with purple coloring along the top, and even though it's so small, you can still open and close the mouth. This giant figure in here is my Camp Cretaceous Spinosaurus figure. Compared to the battle damaged version that we saw earlier, this one has the tan body with the brown along the top, and then the red spine and the red face. This next theropod is a Monolophosaurus figure and is a pretty small figure, but it has the dark blue coloring with the, I think that's kind of a brown accenting along the top of its body. And with this figure too, you can open and close its mouth as well as move its arms and its legs and twist the tail too. Here's my next baby Brachiosaurus figure. This one is a bit more recent and it comes in the brown coloring with a little bit of tan accenting along the side. The next theropod is actually a Pyroraptor, which is very similar to a raptor, but you can see that it has feather texturing all over its body here, and it has these really cool accent feathers right behind its head too. And here is my third juvenile Brachiosaurus figure. This one is the light green version with the dark green along the top, and of course the fully posable arms, tail, neck, and mouth. And here's the final theropod. This is an Atrociraptor figure. This version is the bright orange with the tan accenting along its body. Finally, we have these two huge sauropod figures. This first one on the right is a giant Brachiosaurus figure. It's much larger than this one over here. And this Brachiosaurus is actually an older version. There is a Jurassic World Dominion figure that's come out more recently. And this figure here is the Apatosaurus figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's smaller compared to the Brachiosaurus, but still a giant compared to many of the other figures. First figure that we're checking out is a Tyrannosaurus Rex figure. This T-Rex figure, I believe, was released during the Fallen Kingdom era of Jurassic World. It is the only T-Rex I have that has this bright orange body with the darker brown on the top. And as you'll see with many of these super colossal figures, it has a stomach compartment so you can actually feed this T-Rex smaller figures. And an interesting fact about T-Rexes is that they had brains twice as big as those of other giant carnivores, which means that T-Rexes were actually highly intelligent. Now it's time for our next super colossal figure, and this is another T-Rex. But this T-Rex looks quite a bit different. This one was released for Jurassic World Dominion, so it's a bit more recent of a figure. It's got the totally different coloring with the dark brown and black detailing, but other than that, it's pretty much the same figure in shape and size. So let's give this T-Rex a snack in its stomach compartment. And an interesting fact about the T-Rex was that the strength of their jaw could crush a car. That is super strong. On to our next super colossal figure. This is yet another T-Rex, but this one's pretty special because I had this one custom colored. Now I believe that this was an orange T-Rex originally from the Fallen Kingdom collection, but now I've had it painted to have this fiery red coloring with the yellow and then the black along the top. And I gotta say, it looks really epic. And one interesting thing about this figure is that its eyes don't have pupils, which I think make it look a whole lot more evil. So then let's feed this T-Rex another little snack. And another interesting fact about the T-Rexes was that they might have been able to run between 10 to 25 miles per hour. And you would have a pretty hard time running away from them if they ran that fast. For our next super colossal figure, we've got the Indoraptor figure. Now this figure was released pretty recently, either earlier this year or late last year, and it features the iconic black coloring with the gold striping along the side. It also has much larger front arms compared to the T-Rex, and huge claws on their feet, very similar to raptors. So let's feed this Indoraptor a little snack, and did you know that Indoraptors actually are able to use echolocation to locate their prey? That's a pretty scary fact, especially when you see these teeth. Next up is the first herbivore of this super colossal collection. This is a Mamenchisaurus dinosaur figure. This is a sauropod dinosaur, and I bought this one just about a week ago. It's got the brown coloring with the darker brown striping on the top. And it's actually kind of hard to show it all in camera because its neck is so long. But an interesting fact about these dinosaurs was that their lungs operate operated like a bird's rather than humans. Now here is a much brighter dinosaur. This is my super colossal Atrociraptor figure. This big figure was released for Jurassic World Dominion, and it looks a lot like the Atrociraptor that you see in the movie. And while its head shape is a bit different than a velociraptor's head, it has pretty similar front arms, and I think the feet and the legs look pretty similar to a velociraptor as well. Now in real life, velociraptors weighed only between 20 and 70 pounds, which is a whole lot smaller than a T-Rex or anything like that. So let's feed this dinosaur a little snack and move on to the next dinosaur. Next up is one of my favorite dinosaur species. This is the Carnotaurus Toro super colossal figure released for the Camp Cretaceous series. It's got the mostly orange body with the brown on the top and then the lighter underbelly. It's got a shorter snout compared to T-Rexes, and Carnotauruses also have these two horns on their head. An interesting fact is, although we don't know exactly what these horns were used for, it's speculated that they were either used for attacking and defense, or perhaps even for attracting a mate. Now then, let's feed this Carnotaurus a little snack, and let's move on to the next dinosaur. Now here is another T-Rex collection. I have quite a few super colossal T-Rexes. And this one is actually another special custom colored one. So it's been painted over to now have this camouflage green coloring with some black along the top. And you can see that they even added in some battle damage on the sides, on the legs. And now this figure's pretty old, so you can see that some of the paint is starting to wear off. It looks like it was the orange T-Rex previously. But this might be some of my favorite coloring out of all the super colossal figures that I have. So let's give them a little snack and let's move on to the next dinosaur. And now here is the first Velociraptor figure. This of course is Velociraptor Blue. And it's got this faded green coloring over most of its body, and of course the bright blue stripe along its side. The front arms have the massive claws, as do the feet, much like the Indoraptor. And an interesting fact that you may already know is that now they think that Velociraptors had feathers over its entire body. So this is actually not very accurate anymore. But let's go ahead and feed a snack to the Velociraptor Blue and move on to our next dinosaur. Next up, we've got another giant sauropod dinosaur. This is a Brachiosaurus. And this specific figure was released for Jurassic World Dominion. There's actually an older version of the Brachiosaurus dinosaur that I'll show you in a little bit. But the most notable difference is the coloring along its body and this bright blue reflective paint along its head. And an interesting fact about the Brachiosaurus is that they could weigh up to 25 tons. Which is massive. And now it's time for the super colossal Indominus Rex dinosaur. This figure has the same iconic gray coloring as many of the smaller versions of it, but it's got quite a bit more detailing with all these bumps and spikes, especially the ones on its back, and even the ones on its arms too. Now this figure was released for Camp Cretaceous, and as you probably already know, is a man-made dinosaur, which they created by mixing the DNA of a Carnotaurus, Giganotosaurus, and a ton of other dinosaurs to make the ultimate predator. Now let's feed this Indominus Rex and move on to the next dinosaur. Next up is another four-legged dinosaur. This is the Apatosaurus. This figure has the dark green coloring with the lighter green striping along the top. And on this figure, you can move the legs, the tail, the neck, you can move the head up and down, as well as open and close the mouth. And although this Apatosaurus figure looks smaller than the Brachiosaurus figure we saw earlier, in real life, these dinosaurs were actually larger than Brachiosauruses, sometimes by quite a lot. Now here we have a massive dinosaur made popular by the Jurassic World Dominion movie. This of course is the Giganotosaurus dinosaur. It's got the dark green coloring over pretty much its whole body other than the black detailing along its back. It's got a big old scary looking spine that runs all the way up to its head, and it's got some pretty scary looking teeth too, although it's worth noting that the front arms do look quite a bit larger compared to a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And an interesting fact about these dinosaurs, which you may already know if you saw the Jurassic World Dominion movie, is that they actually outweigh Tyrannosaurus Rexes by a little bit. But do you think a Giganotosaurus would defeat a T-Rex in a one-on-one battle? I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but let's go ahead and give this Giganotosaurus a little snack and move on to the next dinosaur. For our next super colossal figure, we've got another Velociraptor, but actually this one was custom repainted to look like an Indoraptor. And I think it works out pretty well because they're so similar in their shape and it's just been repainted with this black along most of the body and then the gold stripe along both the sides. Although one important thing to note is that at least compared to the real super colossal Indoraptor, the size of the head on this figure is quite a bit smaller, and the shape of the teeth is quite different as well. For the next dinosaur, we're gonna actually do a little side-by-side comparison. These are both Mosasaurus figures, but you'll notice that they look quite a bit different. This is the newer version called the Ocean Protector, and this one is an older version. Now in terms of body shape and size, they look pretty much identical, and on both of them you can open and close the jaws, you can move the flippers, and only on this darker figure here can you move the tail back and forth. But obviously the biggest difference between the two is the coloring. The newer version has a much darker coloring with some white specks all over its body, and the older version here is much lighter in color with a light blue on the sides and then a gray coloring along the top, and its mouth is a much more pinkish color compared to the new version. So which version do you like better, the new version or the old version? And next up is my final super colossal Tyrannosaurus Rex in my entire collection. And you probably haven't seen that many T-Rexes like this one because yet again, it is a custom painted T-Rex. It's got the blue-gray coloring over its entire body with the dark red eyes, which I really love. And instead of its teeth being white, they're a dirty gray color, which I think is a really nice touch. But since it's an older figure, you can see that the custom painting is starting to flake off a little bit, so it is pretty old. Now let's feed this T-Rex a little snack and move on to the next dinosaur. Now here is my largest quadrupedal dinosaur yet. This is my Dreadnoughtus dinosaur, which was released for Jurassic World Dominion. And it is a super long figure. It's kind of hard to even show how long it is from the tail all the way to the head. Plus it's got this pretty cool coloring as well. It's kind of like a dark blue coloring along its body. It's got the lighter underbelly and then the tan detailing on its back all the way up to its head. Now I said earlier that the Apatosaurus was heavier than the Brachiosaurus, but the Dreadnoughtus is even heavier than the Apatosaurus. These dinosaurs weighed around 65 tons, so this is the heaviest of the three by far. And now here is the final super colossal dinosaur of this collection. This is another Brachiosaurus dinosaur, but it actually looks a little bit different compared to the one that I showed you earlier. This is the original version, so it doesn't have any of the new coloring, such as the reflective blue paint along the top of its head right here. So this is just an older and much more basic version of the Brachiosaurus, just with that light brown over pretty much all of its body. But still, this is quite a massive figure nonetheless.
Let's get started with the largest quadrupedal that I have, which is this huge Dreadnoughtus figure. This dinosaur has the blue with the tan striping, and it has one of the longest necks out of any of my figures. So let's set this figure on the very left because this is my largest dinosaur. Next up in size is one of these Brachiosaurus figures. Let's first choose this one right here. It's got the classic brown coloring, and you can move its legs, its neck, and you can even open and close its mouth. Let's move this Brachiosaurus right next to the Dreadnoughtus. Check out that size difference between these two. Next up, we've got another Brachiosaurus figure, but this one is newer. This one is part of the Jurassic World Dominion collection. Now its body shape is pretty much the same as this one right here, but you'll notice that it has some different coloring, and the best part of all is that it has this reflective blue coloring along its face. Next up in size, we've got this huge Apatosaurus figure. This dinosaur is quite a bit smaller than the Brachiosaurus figures, but it's still quite large. It has the green with the light green striping, and I'm sure you recognize this dinosaur from the Jurassic World Dominion movie. Let's keep going. I think the next biggest in size is this Amargosaurus figure. I think this figure's pretty old and that they don't make it anymore, but it's really cool because it has these two huge spines running down its neck and two action buttons, one to move the neck up and down and one to swing the tail back and forth. All right, let's set this down right next to the Apatosaurus. Wow, look at that size difference. Next up in size, let's go with the Jurassic World Dominion Ankylosaurus figure. This figure features the clay red and brown coloring. It's got tons of spikes all over its body, and it has the tail that controls the head and the chomping action too. Let's set the Ankylosaurus down next in line. Oh, those are pretty close in size. Next up, let's go with the Pentaceratops figure. This dinosaur has one of the largest frills that I've seen out of any dinosaur. Plus, it's got horns all along its frill and on its face too. And it has two action buttons, one to move the head up and down, and one to move the torso side to side. All right, let's set this down next to the Ankylosaurus. Next up in size, I think we gotta go with the Stegosaurus figures here. This first one has brown, it's got green, it's got the clay red coloring, and like all the other Stegosaurus figures, it has a tail swinging attack button. Let's set down this first Stegosaurus next to the Pentaceratops. And I think all these Stegosauruses are gonna be pretty similar in size, so let's just go with this one next. It's got the blue-gray coloring with the darker coloring along the top and the pink underbelly. And of course, the swinging tail attack. Let's get this Stegosaurus down next in line. This next one is brighter in color. It's almost a teal green color. It's still got a lighter underbelly, and it has some cool highlights right along its spine. This one will be our third Stegosaurus in line. And our fourth and final Stegosaurus of this collection is this gigantic Trackers Stegosaurus. And this is actually a very new figure. It's got some really cool coloring all over its body. Plus it comes with this crazy looking Dino Tracker backpack. Let's set it down as our fourth Stegosaurus. Next in size, I think, is this Diabloceratops figure. Check out these super huge horns on the top of its head and on the front of its face too. It's got a fiery red color over most of its body and the light tan underbelly. Plus there's an action button to swing its head back and forth. Let's put this down next in size. Up next, let's go with this Sinoceratops in the light gray blue with the tan detailing. And check out those super dark black eyes. That's pretty crazy looking. Let's put this one down next in line, and you can use the tail to move the head too. I've got another Sinoceratops figure right here that is probably the exact same in size, but it's got different coloring. This one is the green with the tan detailing, and this one has some bright yellow eyes. So let's set this one down too, and look at that. This one also controls the head by moving the tail. It looks like we've got a few Triceratops figures up next. This first one has the dark brown with the two tones of blue along its back, and just like these Sinoceratops figures, you can use the tail to control the head. Let's go ahead and grab this next Triceratops figure with the gray and darker gray detailing along the top. But with this figure, instead of the tail that controls the head, there are two action buttons on its back. One controls the head for roaring, and the other controls its tail for swinging back and forth. Now let's set this down next in line as the second Triceratops. And this next Triceratops has some green coloring with brown along its frill and along its back too. And this Triceratops has an even different action. When you press down on its body, it does a roar, and it has sound effects too. Oh, you know what? I think there's another Triceratops here that I didn't even notice. This one has the clay red coloring with the brown detailing along the top and on the frill. And this one has one single action button on its back for the roaring action. This next quadrupedal dinosaur is a Kentrosaurus. It's got the spines running all along its back and these ginormous spikes coming right out of its sides. And this one has a pretty cool action that when you slide this back, it swings its torso back and forth to stab with those huge spikes. Now this dinosaur might be a little taller with its spines compared to the Triceratops, but we're gonna place it right here anyways. For the next up in size, we're gonna go with this dinosaur. This is the Edmontosaurus. Its front legs are smaller compared to its back legs. It's got some pretty cool coloring on its face and on that crown on the top of its head. And like many of these other cool figures that we've seen, you can use the tail to control the head. And it has sound effects too. Next, we're gonna go with this Iguanodon figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's mostly tan, it's got some brown striping with the lighter streaks on the top. And with this figure, when you press down on its back, it has a chomping action. All right, next, let's go with this crazy looking dinosaur. This is a Sarcosuchus. It's got a long and narrow snout with tons of teeth. And the coolest part is that you can use the tail to control the head. The next dinosaur that we're gonna choose is this Ankylosaurus figure right here. This one is clay red, it's got some brown, and its spikes are a lighter color. And I think this one was from Jurassic World Dominion because when you press down on its back, it swings its tail back and forth. Let's go ahead and grab this next Ankylosaurus for our next in size. This one is a really old figure from Jurassic World. I think this one is from the first movie. And check out the size difference between the two. Next up, we've got two baby Brachiosaurus figures right here. And they each have their own unique color. This first one's gray, it's got some dark brown purple coloring along the top. And this other one is a much brighter color. It's a bright green with dark green right along the top. So let's set these down right next to the Ankylosauruses. Next in size, let's see, I think it might be this dinosaur, which I believe is called a Styracosaurus. It's got some super bright coloring along the front of its frill, which is really interesting, and it has some darker detailing along its back. Now let's set this down right next to the baby Brachiosauruses. I think next we're gonna go with this Miragaia figure from Jurassic World Dominion. Like the Kentrosaurus, this one also has some huge spikes sticking right out of its sides. Now let's set it down right next to the Styracosaurus. Next, why don't we go with this dinosaur? This is the Chialingosaurus. It looks somewhat similar to a Stegosaurus because it's got those spines in the top, but the spikes in the very back are quite a bit different, and it has these tiny little spikes coming out of its front legs. And let's set this one down next in line. Next, let's go with this crazy looking dinosaur. This is the Shringosaurus, and it's got a huge and very long neck. It's got those two evil looking horns on the top of its head too. Very wild looking. Let's put this next in line. For the next in size, why don't we go with this one? This is a Calavosaurus. It's got a dark blue body with some orange detailing. It's got some light blue stripes along its tail and on its mouth as well. And it looks like we're running out of space at the edge of the table, so we're gonna start a new line right in front. For our next in size, let's go with this baby Triceratops figure with extreme battle damage right on the side. And let's put this one down right next to the Calavosaurus. This next dinosaur, I believe, is called a Zuniceratops. It's got a pretty bright body, and it's got two horns on the front of its head. So let's set this down right next to the baby Triceratops. They look pretty similar. For our next one, why don't we go with this baby Stegosaurus figure? And you may notice that this baby Stegosaurus came as part of a set with this huge Stegosaurus right here. You can see that they're very similar in color. So let's set this down next in size, next to the Zuniceratops. And next we'll go with these two Dimetrodon figures. This first one is the older figure of the two, and this figure has an action that when you move its tail, it chomps its jaw open and closed. So we're gonna put that right there. And this other Dimetrodon figure is from Jurassic World Dominion, so it's pretty new. And it's got a much brighter spine, although it does not have any action buttons. So we're gonna set it down right next to the other one. Next up, it looks like we've got a Sauropelta figure. This is a pretty small figure, but it has some huge spikes on its back in comparison. It's really cool. So let's set this one down next in line. Here we have a small dinosaur. This is a Mosasaurus. It's got blue with some black detailing along the top and the yellow underbelly. And we'll set this down right here. And finally, we have two Minmi figures. This first one right over here is mostly green in color. Its spikes are more of a yellow color, but it has a ton of spikes along its back for protection. And this second Minmi figure right here is red in color, and its spikes are a bright white in contrast. But other than that, it is pretty identical to the other Minmi figure. First off, we've got the Velociraptor blue figure from the Amber collection. This figure is very movable and very posable. You can see the iconic blue stripe down its side. You can open and close the jaw, move the neck all around. All in all, is a very posable figure. Next up from the Amber collection is Velociraptor Delta. This figure has some pretty cool detailing and coloring on its body. I love the teal green color and the light underbelly. It's really cool and is very posable as well. Can move all the limbs in its body and it is extremely posable. Over here, we've got a Jurassic Park figure. So this figure is really old. This is one of the classic Triceratops figure. You can see that it's got some battle damage, a huge chunk taken out of its side right there. And this Triceratops actually has an action that when you squeeze its stomach, it moves its head up and down. This is another Velociraptor from the Amber collection. This one is Velociraptor Echo. It's got the brown and black coloring along the top with the lighter underbelly, and just like the other figures, is extremely posable. And one thing I haven't pointed out yet is that the tail is actually a bendable rubber. There's like a piece of metal in there, so you can actually bend it and it'll stay in place. That's pretty cool. Here is a Triceratops figure. I think this one might be from Camp Cretaceous, but I can't remember. Let me know in the comments if you know where this Triceratops is from. But it's got the clay red body. It's like a little orangish almost. It's got the brown detailing along the top and the action button on its back for the roaring. Plus, you can move all of its legs too. They can go back and forth a little bit. Here is a bright red and purple Velociraptor figure. This is the classic size for the Velociraptor figures. You can open and close the jaw, can move the arms and the legs as well, but there's no action button on this one. This Velociraptor is an even brighter red and it has some bright green striping and detailing along the top. You can actually move the neck back and forth on this figure and up and down. And this figure is actually spring-loaded in the legs so that it can actually leap up into the air if you were to let it go, which is pretty cool. Up next are these two green Velociraptor figures. They look almost identical, but you can tell that the coloring on this one is a little bit darker. See those stripes? They're a little bit darker. But they both have a button on their back to activate the arm action. Here is one of the brightest dinosaurs in this bin. This is a hybrid Triceratops. As you can tell, it is a hybrid with a Stegosaurus. It's got those gold coloring right along the top there. It's got a little bit of battle damage on the side. And when you move the tail, it actually sticks its head forward as if it's stabbing something. Here's another Velociraptor blue figure, but this is in the classic smaller size. Of course, you can see the iconic stripes down the sides of the body. And it is pretty posable. You can move the arms, the legs, and you can open and close the jaw too. Here is another dark gray Velociraptor, but instead of the blue stripe, we've got some yellow detailing along the top, along its tail, and on the top of its head as well. And this figure is fairly movable as well. You can move the arms and the legs, and of course, open and close the jaw. Here is another super old figure. This is a Jurassic Park Triceratops figure. It's got a dark green coloring along the sides with a darker green along the top. And this figure actually has an action button that when you move this leg, it moves its head up and down. I bet you saw this super colossal figure already too. This is the super colossal Velociraptor Blue. Check out that huge blue stripe down its body. It's got some huge claws on its hands. It's got the light underbelly, and of course, like all the super colossal figures, it has the stomach compartment so you can feed it smaller dinosaurs. Up next, this isn't a Triceratops, but I believe it is a Sinoceratops. So pretty closely related. Comes with some sound effects as you can hear. It's got some pretty cool coloring with the gray along its body. It's got some brighter yellow right on the front as well. And you can use the tail to control the head. Before we go any further, I've actually got some brand new figures that we're gonna open up right now. Let's start with this Jurassic World Dominion, Dr. Ian Malcolm, and Velociraptor pack. So here is the Velociraptor from the pack. It's got a dark green color and some pretty cool detailing along the top. It's like brown and then some green detailing speckled in too. That's pretty cool. I don't have another Velociraptor that is colored like this. And here is the Dr. Ian Malcolm figure with an electric staff, as well as some grasshopper figures that I'm sure you recognize from the new Jurassic World Dominion movie. Next, we've got the Triceratops from the Hammond collection. I'm excited to check this one out. This Triceratops is a dark brown color. It has some pretty faint detailing along its body. You can see it's a bit lighter in some areas, but overall it's kind of the same brown color everywhere. It's got a lighter underbelly, but my favorite part is the face and the frill too. That's where the most detail is. Look at these horns. They've looked like they've gone through a lot of wear and tear. I love those orange eyes. So yeah, the face is definitely my favorite part of this figure, and it is fairly movable as well. You can see that you can move the legs back and forth and up and down and all over, and there are 2 joints in the tail as well, which is a pretty cool detail. So all in all, it's okay. I would have liked to have seen better coloring along the body because it's pretty subtle and it kind of just looks like a brown Triceratops all over. But it's pretty different from the other Triceratops I have, so I'm still happy to have this in my collection. Next up, we've got Velociraptor Charlie from the Amber collection. This figure has the bright green coloring with the darker stripes along the top and is just as posable as all the other Velociraptor figures. We've got another hybrid Triceratops figure, and I think we've actually got another one with different coloring. These are both hybrid Triceratops mixed with a Stegosaurus. You can see battle damage on both of them, and on both these figures, when you move the tail, it swings its head forward as if it's stabbing, just like the bright blue one that we saw earlier. Here's another large Triceratops figure. This one actually has 2 action buttons. The first one activates the head to move up and down, and the second button swings the tail. It's got some pretty dark coloring as well. It's a dark green with some dark brown detailing along its top and on the front as well. This Velociraptor is a dark blue color. It's got some darker stripes on the top, and it's actually got an action button, I believe, that activates the arms. There we go. And of course you can open and close the jaw and move the head too. Here is a little Triceratops figure. I think I've actually got 2 of these that are identical. Both of them have the extreme battle damage right there on the side that you can open and close, which is a pretty cool feature. And both of them are this light green color with the brown on the top too. Here's another bright Velociraptor figure. This one is a bright blue with darker striping along the top. And this one is actually spring-loaded, so like the other ones that we saw, if you bend the legs and then let it go, it'll actually jump up into the air. Here's a dinosaur species that's a relative to the Triceratops. This is the Zuniceratops. It's got the 2 horns in the front and a big frill, and then the green body with the darker detailing along the top. Next up, we've got a Velociraptor with a slashing action. This figure is spring-loaded, so you can swing it side to side to swing those arms and claws around. That's a pretty cool feature. Here's another big dinosaur figure. This is also a relative to the Triceratops. This is an Pseudoceratops, and it has 2 action buttons on its back. The first one activates the head for the roaring, and the second activates the tail. That's pretty cool. Plus it's got some dark green coloring on its legs that fades into the blue, and then the red detailing on the top and on its face too. Looks like we've got 2 more Velociraptor figures in here. This first one is another super bright Velociraptor with the orange and yellow, and it is also spring-loaded, so this one will jump up into the air as well. And this other Velociraptor is Velociraptor Blue with battle damage on the side that you can open and close. And then finally, I've got these itty-bitty little Triceratops figures from Jurassic World. They all look pretty identical, but with different coloring. This first one is a dark brown color. Also got a gray one with lighter gray on the top. And finally, this bright green one with lighter green on the top. We're gonna start with this old Jurassic Park T-Rex figure. This T-Rex figure has the real feel skin, so it's actually rubber instead of hard plastic. And when you press on the stomach, it opens and closes its mouth, although it doesn't work too well anymore. It's pretty old. And our first prey is this Dino Tracker's Stegosaurus. This is one of my newest Stegosaurus figures. It has this awesome backpack. There's some pretty cool coloring and detailing all over its body too. For the next mighty T-Rex, we're gonna go with this bright orange one, I believe from Fallen Kingdom. This figure features posable arms and legs, and you can use the tail for a roaring action or for a chomping action. This is one of the few dinosaur figures that has this type of chomping action. For our next prey, we're gonna go with the Amargosaurus figure. This dinosaur stands on all four legs, it has the super long neck, and these two really tall spine or frill things running down its neck all the way to its tail, and has an action button to move its neck and to move its tail too. This T-Rex figure is from the most recent Jurassic World movie, which was Dominion. It has the darker brown body with the black top, it has posable arms and legs, and on this figure you can move the tail side to side to move its torso and to open and close its jaw. Our next predator is actually another carnivore. This is the Baryonyx figure, and this one specifically has the bright orange paint on the top of its head. But let me know in the comments, do you think that T-Rexes hunted Baryonyxes? Back to the T-Rex side, we've got a T-Rex from the original Jurassic World movie. And like many figures from that movie, this figure is actually made by Hasbro, not Mattel, who makes all the new figures today. This figure has some sound effects. You can pose it in a roaring pose, and you can move its tail down for a chomping action. For the next prey, we've got an Iguanodon figure. I believe this one is also from Jurassic World Dominion. It's a medium-sized figure and it actually has an action. When you press down on its back, it chomps its head. This next T-Rex I got very recently. This is actually a custom painted T-Rex figure. You can see right here that it is also a battle damage T-Rex that you can still turn on and off, which is pretty awesome, and I love this camo coloring. This prey herbivore figure is the Hammond Collection Triceratops. Unlike many of the other Triceratops figures, this one has much more natural coloring. It does have a lighter underbelly, and there's some detailing along its face. I really love the detail on its horns. It makes it look really worn. Up next for the T-Rexes is actually another custom painted T-Rex that I got probably a few weeks ago. This figure is called, I think it's like the Terran T-Rex or something like that, and it has an action button on its back that you can use for the tearing action, and another button on its back to move the tail too. And this custom paint job has a much more realistic look, I think. You can see different shades of brown, and then of course it has the lighter underbelly. But the coolest part, I think, are all the battle damage slashes that the artist added onto this figure. So I think this is a lot more battle damage than this Terran T-Rex originally had. I think this next unusual dinosaur could also have been prey for T-Rex dinosaurs. This is a Sarcosuchus, and I believe there's two different versions of this figure. And this one has the green body with the brown on the top, and of course the super long jaw that you can open and close with a button on its tail. This T-Rex figure is a dark green color, and one of the only few, I think, that is naturally dark green. This was not custom painted. Its arms and legs and tail are posable like many of the other figures, and it has a button on the top of its head for the chomping action. Our next prey is an Ankylosaurus. This figure, I think, is from the Camp Cretaceous series, and it features the clay red underbelly and then the brown armoring on top with the tan spikes. And this figure features an attack action when you press down on its back. Back to the T-Rex side, we've got the Camp Cretaceous Epic Roarin' T-Rex. I think this T-Rex figure might actually be a little bit larger than many of the other T-Rex figures, and it features the movable arms and legs, and by moving the tail, you can move the T-Rex's head and open and close the jaw. Next up for the prey, I've got another Stegosaurus figure. This one is quite a bit older. It features the blue-green coloring on the sides. It's got a lighter yellow underbelly. And like many of the Stegosaurus figures, it has an attack button when you press down on one of its spines. Here's another battle damage T-Rex. This figure, kind of like the custom painted Terran T-Rex, has battle damage painted on its body, some on its neck, a little bit on its chin, and elsewhere on its body too. And other than that, you can move its arms, you can adjust its legs and its tail, and it has the button at the top of the head for roaring. Back to the prey side, we've got, I believe, a Sinoceratops. This figure is in the light blue-gray coloring. It's also got some bright yellow and orange coloring on the front of its face. And by moving the tail, you can move the head, and it has sound effects too. These next two T-Rexes are a bit smaller in size than many of the other ones. This first one here is the Sound Surge T-Rex that came out for Jurassic World Dominion. And it's pretty small and it's a hard plastic compared to this Jurassic Park. I believe it's a juvenile T-Rex, and this figure has the real feel skin, so Almost its whole body is this soft rubber, and this figure has some epic battle damage on its side, but no sound effects. However, the Sound Surge obviously does have sound effects. For our next prey figure, we're gonna go with one that might be a little controversial. It is a Velociraptor. Do you think that T-Rexes hunted Velociraptors? This figure is the basic Velociraptor, so you can pose its tail, its legs, and its arms, but it doesn't come with any sound effects or attack buttons. Next up for the T-Rexes is a figure that is very special to me. This is a Stomp and Escape T-Rex that I custom painted myself. And let's actually compare this painting with the original version. So here is the original paint job. You can see that it's mostly brown and it has some gray detailing along the top of its body. And compare that with what I did. So it still has a lot of brown on the top, but it's got this really nice green color running all the way up to its face. And then of course the bright yellow underbelly. I think it's pretty cool, and it is one of the figures I am the most proud of. The next prey figure is another scary looking carnivore, but it still might have been hunted by the T-Rex. This is the Suchomimus figure, and I think there are two different versions of this figure. This one is in the blue with the yellow detailing running down its spine, and it has one action button for the chomping action. Next, let's go ahead and open up this brand new one that I bought for this video. This is the Jurassic World Legacy Collection Extreme Chompin' T-Rex. All right, here it is. It's another bright orange T-Rex with the darker brown on top and the light underbelly. It has the posable arms, it's got the posable legs, and the tail as well. And you can actually move the neck and head around quite a lot too. But don't forget, it also has the chomping button on the top of its head. Our next prey is another Triceratops figure. I believe that this one is from Jurassic World Dominion, and it has some unusual colors on it. There's this soft green color in the back, and then it has this more swampy green color running up all the way to its face, and it has the orange on the top of its frill too. And this figure features an attack button when you press down on its body. This next T-Rex is an extreme battle damage T-Rex. It has the light underbelly with brown on the sides and then the gray detailing on the top. And I think this T-Rex might have been what this originally looked like. So check out those differences in the coloring now. They look totally different. For our next prey, we've got another Iguanodon figure, but this one actually came out quite recently. I believe it was released as a pack with a Scorpiovenator figure. And this Iguanodon has the light tan on the sides with the darker brown on top, and it has an attack button when you press down on its back. Our next T-Rex is the mighty bull T-Rex from Jurassic Park. You can see the leg tattoo right there. And like many of the older figures, this has the real feel skin, so it's a soft rubber over most of its body. And something that's pretty unique for the older Jurassic Park figures, this T-Rex can actually swallow smaller dinosaurs. And you can see the stomach compartment right there. This prey figure is the Herrerasaurus, and I believe this dinosaur is also a carnivore, but I think it was plenty small enough to be hunted by T-Rexes. And this Herrerasaurus figure features the battle damage on the side that you can open and close. Next, let's grab this huge super colossal T-Rex that's been hanging out in the back. This figure is also a custom colored T-Rex, and it is now in the dark green coloring with the black striping along the top. This figure might be one of my oldest super colossal figures. It definitely has a lot of wear and tear to it. Next up for the prey, I've got a small Parasaurolophus figure. Now it doesn't have any action buttons, but you can still pose its arms, its legs, its tail, and of course its head. And here's another classic T-Rex figure with a light brown and dark brown along the top, and a fully posable body, and the jaw chomping action. For our final prey and dinosaur of this collection is a baby Brachiosaurus figure. This one comes in a few different versions, and this is the light green on the sides and the dark green along the top. The first two figures to face off in this collection is this Spinosaurus and this battle damage T-Rex. Let's check out the Spinosaurus first. This is the Legacy Collection Spinosaurus, so this one's actually pretty hard to find nowadays.
It's got the huge front arms, it's got a long and narrow snout with a lot of teeth, and this figure is quite a bit larger than its opponent, the battle-damaged T-Rex. This figure is a bright orange color. It's got battle-damaged slashes painted all over its body, even right on its face and on its chin. Now this T-Rex has tiny arms compared to the Spinosaurus, but it's still got the same jaw-chomping action. Next up for the versus is this T-Rex versus this Allosaurus figure. Let's start with the T-Rex. This is the Jurassic World Dominion battle-damaged T-Rex. It's got a darker orange body than the T-Rex that we just saw, and you can turn the battle damage on and off with the click of a button, and overall it has some pretty cool detailing and darker shading. Now let's see what's different about this huge Allosaurus figure, also from Jurassic World Dominion. Now this figure also has battle damage on the side, but you can even open it up and move the ribs to show the stomach underneath. Now this Allosaurus is a little bit smaller than the T-Rex, but it still has an awesome button for jaw chomping and sound effects. Up next for our predator competition is this Jurassic Park Utah Raptor versus this new Dino Trackers Endoraptor. Let's first check out this Endoraptor. It is super reflective, it's a dark blue color. I think it might be just around the same size as the Utah Raptor, but it's got some really cool actions. First, you can move its arms for some sound effects and a jaw-chomping action. And it's also got a button on its back for more jaw-chomping action. Now let's see how this super old Utah Raptor holds up. You can see that little Jurassic Park tattoo on its leg right there. Now this figure used to be battery operated, but unfortunately since it's so old, it doesn't work anymore. Like many of the vintage Jurassic Park figures, it has a soft rubbery skin, and it still has a chomping action when you press down on its tail. Next, let's go with a Carnotaurus versus an Albertosaurus. The Albertosaurus is a little bit smaller than the Carnotaurus, and it has much brighter coloring. It's got the orange stripe running down its side and the green body, and the tail twists back and forth to control the head and chomp the jaw. Now let's check out this bigger Carnotaurus figure. This figure is dark brown with a gray underbelly. It's got even smaller arms than a T-Rex does. And you'll notice that the Albertosaurus arms are a little bit bigger. And just like the Albertosaurus, the tail swivels back and forth to move the head and for a jaw-chomping action. For our next versus, let's grab this other Carnotaurus figure versus this Suchomimus. Let's start with the Carnotaurus. This figure is a bit smaller than the darker Carnotaurus that we just saw. The coloring overall is a lot more simplistic. There's not anywhere near as much shading. There's a little bit of white underneath its chin and some dark coloring on its neck and the top of its head. And the actions are a bit more simplistic too. There is one button at the top of its back for some sound effects. Let's compare that to this bright yellow Suchomimus figure. This Jurassic World figure stands a little bit taller than the Carnotaurus figure. It's got a huge spine that runs all the way from the head down to the tail. And just like the Spinosaurus, it has a long and narrow snout with a bunch of teeth on the inside. And this figure has two actions. The first is a jaw-chomping action, and the second is a tail-swinging action. Our next two predators are this huge Scorpius Rex figure and this even larger T-Rex figure. Let's start with the T-Rex figure. It's got a light brown body with the darker coloring along the top, and you can move all its limbs, and it has the single button on the top of its head for the chomping action. Now the Scorpius Rex has a few more features. First off, I love the detailing on this figure. There's some bumps. You can see this huge ridge running down its back. It's got these tiny little spikes on its elbows. And of course, it's got the poisonous quills on the end of its tail. And it still has two action buttons. The first moves its jaw, and check out those super awesome teeth. And the second button moves its arms for slashing. Our next two predators are first a Carcharodontosaurus versus a Cryolophosaurus. The Carcharodontosaurus is definitely a little bit bigger, but the Cryolophosaurus is a brighter yellow than the Carcharodontosaurus. Comparing the size, the Carcharodontosaurus is a little bit bigger, and the Cryolophosaurus is a brighter yellow color. It's got movable limbs, and you can use the tail to swing the head around. And the Carcharodontosaurus, though it's not as bright, it still has some bright orange running down its back and on its neck. And instead of the tail as the action button on this figure, there's a button on its back for a chomping action. Right here, we've got a Metriacanthosaurus versus an Allosaurus figure from Jurassic Park. Let's check out this vintage figure first. Now this Allosaurus looks quite a bit different from the new Jurassic World figures. It's got a different head shape and a slightly different body. But the cool thing about this figure is that there's multiple battle damage parts that you can take off of its body. Check that out, and even on its tail too. Look at all that battle damage. That is super cool. Now let's compare that with the Metriacanthosaurus. I believe this is from the Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom era. It's pretty bright in color, and it's around the same size as the Allosaurus figure. And this one doesn't have any battle damage, but it does have an action button on its back to control the jaw. Before we continue on with the rest of the bin, let's actually open up this new Hammond Collection Concavinator. Alright, now I think I only have one other Concavinator figure in my entire collection, so I'm super happy to add this one. It looks like it has quite a few different colors on its body. It's mainly got this blue, and there's some bright orange, brown, light tan, and then a very dark red right around its eyes. And since it's a Hammond Collection figure, it doesn't have any action buttons, but its body is super posable. You can bend it at all of its limbs and joints. And its neck and head is especially posable, which I really like. All in all, I think this figure stands up to the quality of all of the other Hammond Collection figures. Next up for our Predator versus Predator, we've got another Carnotaurus versus an Allosaurus. The Carnotaurus figure is quite a bit larger than the Allosaurus, so let's check this one out first. Now this figure has a bright orange body with the gray underbelly. It's got the tiny little front arms, just like the figure we saw earlier, and it also has the tail that you can move back and forth to move the head and chomp the jaw. Now let's see what's different about this Allosaurus figure. I think this one is even brighter in color. It's got the yellow and 2 tones of blue. It's got bigger front arms than the Carnotaurus figure. It's also got a tiny little row of spines running down its back to its tail. And this figure has 2 action buttons. The first operates the jaw, and the second moves the arms up and down. The next 2 predators are this Dilophosaurus versus the Scorpiovenator. These figures are around the same size, but you'll see that the Dilophosaurus is a little bit longer. Now this Dilophosaurus is the basic edition, so there is no action button. You can move the limbs a little bit, and you can activate the frills, but sadly that's pretty much it. Let's see how that compares against the Scorpiovenator. This figure is pretty brightly colored as well, and you can move all of the limbs, but this figure does have an action button. When you press down on its back, it activates the chomping action. Check out those sound effects too. Next, we've got the Siatsmicararum versus the Irritator. Between these two, the Siatsmicararum is definitely the larger dinosaur. It's got tons of spikes on its head, running all the way down to its back. And like many of the other figures we've seen so far, you can move the tail back and forth to move its head and chomp its jaw. Now let's check out its competitor, this Irritator. Although it's a little bit smaller, it still has some really cool coloring with the 2 tones of blue on the top. And on this figure, you can use the tail to move the head around as well, although you have to open and close the mouth manually. Let's keep on going. For our next versus, we've got a Ceratosaurus versus an Indoraptor, and see how much longer the Indoraptor is compared to the Ceratosaurus. This Indoraptor is the basic edition, so once again, there are no action buttons that you can press, but you can still move its arms, legs, and its tail, and it's still got some awesome spikes on its body. Let's see how the Ceratosaurus is different. It's got a dark green body with some black detailing on the top. This dinosaur seems a lot more bulkier in size. And of course, it's got an action at the top of its back for roaring and sound effects. This is the Baryonyx versus the Amber Collection Raptor. I think the Baryonyx is a little bit bigger, but this Raptor is so much more brighter. Because this figure is from the Amber Collection, there's a lot more attention to the coloring, and the limbs can be posed in many more different ways too. This figure is perfect for posing on a display shelf. Now let's check out its competitor, the Baryonyx. Because this figure isn't from the Amber Collection, there's not as much that you can pose on its body, but the cool part about this figure is that it has an action button on its back. Check out that chomping action. Now let's compare 2 very different dinosaurs. This is a Pteranodon versus an Allosaurus.
This Pteranodon figure has foldable wings that you can open up, and it's probably a foot in length from wingtip to wingtip. And it's got a button on its back to flap the wings too. Plus, you can open and close its mouth manually. Now let's see this Allosaurus figure. This one is pretty simplistic in color. It has the gray on the sides and then the yellow detailing all along the top. Of course, it's got the iconic ridge right above its eye. And on this figure, there's one single action button for the jaw. These next two figures are smaller. I believe this one is called an Elaphrosaurus versus, if I remember correctly, the Rugops primus figure. The Elaphrosaurus has a long and narrow snout and is mostly tan. It's got some brown as well. But this other figure, it's got darker coloring as well, and you can move its tiny little arms and open and close its mouth. Up next, we've got two different raptor species. This first one is a Pyroraptor from Jurassic World Dominion, and this other one is, I believe, an Amber Collection Velociraptor. Just like many of the other Amber Collection figures, it is a lot more posable than many of the normal figures, and they did a pretty decent job with its coloring as well. And the Pyroraptor has some decent detailing. You can check out all those feather designs right there. And the coolest part, I think, about the Pyroraptor are these huge feathers right at the top of its head. And next, we've got a Jurassic World miniature T-Rex figure versus a Jurassic Park Velociraptor. Both these figures are pretty old, but this Velociraptor is the oldest. It's got a spring-loaded chomping action, and it features some pretty unique coloring that I don't think I have another Velociraptor that's colored like this. Now let's check out this other miniature T-Rex figure. This specific figure comes from an older line from Jurassic World. I think it was actually made by Hasbro, so it's got some battle damage right there on the side. And on this figure, you can move the tail back and forth and side to side to operate the jaw and the head.
This Godzilla is the largest Godzilla figure that I have. It stands over a foot tall, and it is 20 inches long from head all the way to the tail. It's got a bunch of texturing all over its body and these huge spikes right on its back, the iconic 3 rows of spines. And this figure has 6 different points of articulation, 2 for the arms, 2 for the feet, and then 2 different points for its tail. One up here, and then a smaller point back here. Now let's meet the first Indominus Rex to face off against Godzilla. This is my super colossal I-Rex. This figure was released in 2020 as part of the Primal Attack toy line. It's got huge arms with spikes on the elbows. It's also got those spikes along its neck. And coolest of all is that this I-Rex has a stomach compartment, so you can feed this I-Rex either smaller dinosaurs, or in this case, a small human, and then you can release the figures in its stomach compartment right down here. Now it's time to face off against Godzilla. And first off, look at that size difference. This Godzilla figure is quite large, but it's still very small in comparison to this super colossal figure. And I'm pretty sure that Godzilla is more lightweight too. Let's check it out. And this super colossal figure, oh boy, yep, that's probably 2 or 3 times the weight of this Godzilla figure. Now then, who do you think would win, Godzilla or the super colossal Indominus Rex? Our next Indominus Rex figure is the Destroy and Devour I-Rex figure. This figure stands at about 8 inches tall and is actually 22 inches long from its head to its tail, so a little bit longer than Godzilla. And it's got this action button on its tail to activate the chomping action. And if you look, you can see that there's actually a little stomach compartment in its mouth to store smaller dinosaurs. And there's a secondary action right here on its back that activates its claw slashing action. Now let's face the figure off against Godzilla. So now the Indominus Rex appears to be the slightly shorter figure, but as I said earlier, the Indominus Rex is actually a little bit longer from tail to head than the Godzilla figure is. And now let's check out the weight between the two. There's the I-Rex, and here's the Godzilla figure. You know, they're pretty similar. I think Godzilla wins by a tiny bit when it comes to weight. Now comment below, who do you think would win, Godzilla or the Destroy and Devour Indominus Rex? The next Indominus Rex figure is a pretty special one. This is the Dino Hybrid Indominus Rex figure. Now this figure was actually made for the first movie, and it was made by Hasbro and not Mattel like these newer figures. And it's got a few special features. First off is this coloring with the bright red on its back and the gold on its hands and on its underbelly. That is very unusual for an I-Rex figure. It's got this hidden button right here on its back to activate the spikes. And it's also motorized, so if you pull down on its arm, its mouth actually has a chomping action. But I gotta say, the one thing I do not like about this figure is that it can't really stand up on its legs. It was just designed pretty poorly so that it has to lean back on its tail like this, as many of the older Hasbro figures have to do. Now let's face it off against Godzilla. Now off the bat, it looks like the I-Rex figure is taller, although it is only taller because it's leaning back on its tail. If it was actually standing, you can see that they're actually really close to the same height. But let's also see the weight difference between the two. This one has some batteries and a motor in it, so I suspect it's gonna be a lot heavier. Now let's lift up Godzilla here, and yeah, the I-Rex figure is a little bit heavier, not as much as I thought it would be. But now it's time. Who would win, Godzilla or the hybrid Indominus Rex? Next up is the extreme damage Indominus Rex. This figure features more of the classic gray coloring along its body, but the cool part is when you press this button up top right here, it actually reveals the battle damage on the side. Look at that, there's some red underneath there that you can turn on and off. Plus it's also got the button on its tail for the jaw chomping action. And look at that, even this figure has a small storage compartment in its mouth so it can eat smaller dinosaurs. Now it's time for the face-off against Godzilla. This Indominus Rex figure is almost 10 inches high, so not quite as tall as the Godzilla figure, but it is longer. This figure is 23 inches long from the tail to the head, so a little bit longer than Godzilla once again. And now let's check out in terms of weight, which one's heavier. Oh, this one's pretty heavy. It's got some batteries in it. And now let's see the Godzilla here. Not too much lighter, but the Indominus Rex once again is the heavier dinosaur. So now who would win, the battle damaged Indominus Rex or Godzilla? Up next for the I-Rexes is a custom painted Indominus Rex. Now this is actually another Destroy and Devour Indominus Rex, which we saw earlier back here, but this one has been meticulously repainted with these bright and exciting new colors. There's the blue along its underbelly, then it transforms into the purple here, and then the orange and black on its back. And don't forget its really cool chomping action. Now it's time to face off against Godzilla. Standing upright all the way here, the Indominus Rex is the taller one, although it normally stands around this height, so they're actually once again pretty close in size. And as with the earlier Destroy and Devour figure, they're pretty similar in weight, although I think the I-Rex is a little bit heavier. Now this is one crazy and dangerous looking I-Rex. So then, who do you think would win, Godzilla or the custom painted I-Rex? This next figure is another vintage Indominus Rex. This one, I believe, was released in 2015 for the first Jurassic World movie, so it's pretty old, and this is one of the only Indominus Rexes that I have that has this rubbery texture along its head and neck. And a cool and unique feature about this figure is when you press down on the arm, it actually chomps the jaw with sound effects. Now let's face it off against Godzilla. And these two figures are almost very close in terms of height. I think the I-Rex is a little bit taller generally. And the I-Rex is definitely the older figure, but let's see who is the heavier figure. There's the I-Rex and here's Godzilla. You know what? I think this time Godzilla is the heavier figure, even though the I-Rex has some batteries in it for the sound effects. So who do you think would win in this battle? The I-Rex figure from the first Jurassic World movie or Godzilla? Next, I've got a little surprise for you, and that is this new Godzilla figure from the upcoming The New Empire movie. Now let's have a look at it. First off, the blue coloring is a bit brighter compared to the older version of Godzilla. And obviously these spikes are this bright red color, and that bright red goes all the way down to the tip of his tail. And check it out right here, there's actually a button for the sound effects, so let's hear some of those. So it's got those two sound effects, and overall it's pretty cool, but definitely a whole lot smaller than the older Godzilla figure that I have. And it does look like this Godzilla figure is kind of skinnier too. This larger one here is quite bulky in the torso. And here's the first I-Rex to face off against the new Godzilla figure. This is the Dino Trackers I-Rex figure. And this is one of my newest I-Rex figures that I've bought. You can tell that it's a bit more slim in its design compared to these other older figures. Those are huge and bulky, but this dinosaur seems a little bit more lightweight and actually a bit smaller in size overall. But it's still got some cool action features. Over here on the tail, there's a button, and you can move the tail back and forth for chomping the jaw and for twisting the head back and forth. And it's got these glowing green lights coming out of its neck too. So now let's face off, the I-Rex versus the new Godzilla figure. Now obviously in terms of size, this I-Rex figure is a whole lot larger. It might be 2 or 3 times the size of this Godzilla figure, and I bet it's obviously heavier as well, just given its size. Now then, who do you think would win between these two? The Dino Trackers I-Rex or the new Empire Godzilla figure? This next figure is the Sound Surge Indominus Rex, released for Jurassic World Dominion. It's quite a bit smaller in size compared to many of the other figures that we've seen so far, but it still has the classic gray coloring with some brown detailing along its face and back, and of course the orange eyes. And the special feature of this figure is the sound effects. Right here's the speaker, and then there's a button up top, so let's hear some of those sounds. Now let's face it off against the Godzilla figure. And now this smaller Godzilla figure is taller than the I-Rex. You know, probably by a good 2 or 3 inches. And now let's see which one's heavier. This one still has batteries and a speaker in it, so it's still pretty heavy. But so does this Godzilla figure, although I think the Indominus Rex figure is slightly heavier. Now then, who would win in this battle? The Sound Surge I-Rex or the new Empire Godzilla? Here is the Feeding Frenzy Indominus Rex figure, released as part of the Camp Cretaceous collection. The proportions of this Indominus Rex is very different. It's got this giant head and the smaller body. Now there's a hidden button on its nose for some sound effects, and it has a chomping action as well. First, you press down on the tail to open up its mouth, and then you feed it its food, or in my case, my finger right here, and it'll chomp down right onto the food. Now it's time to face off against Godzilla, and once again, the new Godzilla figure is slightly taller. The Feeding Frenzy figure is probably 2 inches shorter. And let's see, in terms of weight, the Feeding Frenzy figure's decently heavy. And let's check out the Godzilla figure. And I think the Indominus Rex is the heaviest of these two figures. Now comment below, who would win in a battle, the Feeding Frenzy I-Rex or Godzilla? And the final I-Rex of this Versus collection is this smaller I-Rex from the original Jurassic World movie. So this one was also made by Hasbro. Now it has a lot of the iconic gray coloring, but you'll notice that the top is this more green-gray coloring, which is interesting. And it's got a few special features. First off is this hidden battle damage right on the side that you can click open to reveal its insides and some bones. And this figure has a chomping action. When you move the tail up and down, it actually moves his head up and down and closes his jaw too. So then let's have our final face-off, the I-Rex versus Godzilla. Now this I-Rex figure doesn't really stand up on its own anymore, so it's kind of hard to say which figure is taller, but I would bet you that the Godzilla figure is the tallest just by guessing and trying to get him to pose in his normal position. And as for who is the heavier figure, let's see here, the I-Rex figure is pretty lightweight, and remember the Godzilla figure actually has batteries in it, so this one is definitely the heavier of the two. Now finally, who would win in this battle? The smaller I-Rex figure or the Godzilla figure? And here is the entire collection. Go ahead and comment below which of these Indominus Rex figures was your favorite. And also, which of these two Godzilla figures was your favorite? The smaller one or the larger one? Want to see more dino videos? Click the subscribe button now.